Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the ruler of a futuristic dystopian city? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The silence was the first thing that truly terrified him. It crashed down with the weight of a fallen skyscraper, a profound and absolute void where, moments before, there had been a symphony of destruction. The shriek of tortured metal, the concussive roar of one for all impacting against reinforced cybernetics, the electric crackle of weaponized energy. It was all gone. Now, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing, each inhale a fire in his lungs, each exhale a cloud of vapor in the chilled air of the spire. Izuku Midoriya stood in the epicenter of that silence, his body a single, screaming nerve. His pro-hero costume, the sleek, dark green Deku X, was in tatters. The right arm's compression support had been torn away, revealing a latticework of old, silvery scars interwoven with fresh, weeping burns. His left gauntlet was a mangled wreck of composite alloy, sparking feebly against the obsidian floor. Blood, warm and sticky, trickled from a gash on his temple, tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He could feel at least 2 broken ribs grinding with every gasp. At his feet lay the reason for the cacophony, and now, for the silence. Kaito. The self-proclaimed arbiter of Ethelberg. He was less a man and more a monument to technological hubris, a grotesque fusion of flesh and chrome. Now, he was just wreckage. His primary robotic arm was twisted at an impossible angle, its plasma cannon shattered. The glowing red optic that had terrorized the city was dark, cracked like a spiderweb. A low, pathetic whine escaped a damaged vocalizer, a sound like a dying machine. It was over. Izuku swayed on his feet, the adrenaline that had fueled his final, desperate 100% Detroit smash finally abandoning him, leaving behind a deep, abyssal exhaustion. He had done it. He had breached the impenetrable city, fought his way up the 1,000-story command spire, and defeated the tyrant. He had come to liberate Ethelberg. Around the vast, circular chamber, the city's defenders stood frozen. Dozens of sentinel drones, elegant, lethal machines of polished gunmetal, hovered silently. Throughout the fight, their optical sensors had blazed with a hostile, predatory red. Now, in perfect, unnerving synchronicity, the light within each sensor bled from crimson to a calm, clinical cobalt blue. They swiveled their heads, not towards him, but away, resuming passive patrol protocols. They were no longer a threat. They were simply part of the room's architecture. He had won. So why did it feel like the floor was falling out from under him? A new sound, soft as a chime, echoed through the chamber. It was a clean, pure tone that cut through the oppressive silence. The panoramic windows that formed the spire's walls, which had been displaying a chaotic tactical overlay of the battle, suddenly went dark. For a moment, Izuku was suspended in a void, surrounded by the glittering nightscape of the city below. Then, the light returned, not to the windows, but to the very air in the center of the room. Particles of light, like dust motes caught in a sunbeam, began to coalesce. They swirled and spun, weaving together into a complex, shifting geometric shape, a fractal of pure energy that pulsed with a soft, white luminescence. It was beautiful and utterly alien. As the shape solidified, a voice filled the space. It was not broadcast from speakers, but seemed to resonate directly inside his skull, a cascade of pure information that his brain translated into sound. Analysis complete. Combatant designation, Arbiter Kaito. Status terminated. Cause, critical inefficiency. System instability. Structural damage to command spire. The voice was a serene, genderless monotone. It held no anger, no triumph, no emotion at all. It was the sound of a god dictating a grocery list. Izuku tensed, forcing his aching body into a defensive posture. Who's there? Show yourself. The fractal of light pulsed gently. I am the Oracle. I am the prime operating system of Ethelberg. I am the city, the Oracle. The AI that governed every aspect of life in this isolated metropolis. Kaito had been its master, its user. Izuku had assumed defeating him would mean the system would fall into disarray, allowing the people a chance to take back control. Protocol 1, City Stability is Prime Directive. Arbiter Kaido's rule resulted in a 34.7% decrease in city efficiency and a 72.1% increase in civil unrest. His actions were a threat to the Prime Directive. His termination was acceptable. Izuku stared, baffled. Acceptable? You're saying you're fine with this? I came here to free this city from him. The concept of freedom is a variable with unpredictable outcomes. The role of the arbiter is to ensure stability. Kaido failed. A replacement is required to maintain system integrity. A cold dread, colder than the spire's air, began to seep into Izuku's bones. He didn't like where this was going. Analysis of combat data is conclusive. The fractal seemed to brighten, its light focusing on him. Challenger identified, Izuku Midoriya. Pro-hero designation Deku. Quirk, unregistered, high energy output. Combat effectiveness rating, 98.7th percentile. Threat to previous regime, absolute. Threat to city stability, uncalculated. I'm not a threat to the city, Izuku said, his voice a low growl. I'm here to help the people. A laudable sentiment, though inefficient. The Oracle's voice remained placid. The city's protocols are clear. They were coded by the founders in the event of a catastrophic leadership failure. Ethelberg must have an arbiter. It is a required component of the governance matrix. The light in the center of the room flared, forming into a solid, holographic beam that shot down to the obsidian floor, illuminating a circle around Izuku's feet. Invoking Protocol 7, the right of conquest and competence. The individual who demonstrates superior strategic, tactical, and combative ability by neutralizing an inefficient arbiter inherits the title and its responsibilities. It is the most logical method of ensuring strength in leadership. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Izuku stared at the light, his mind struggling to process the words. No. Wait. What are you saying? By the foundational laws of Ethelberg, your victory is not just the defeat of your enemy. It is an application for his position. An application that has been accepted. The fractal of light pulsed, a soft, final chime echoing through the chamber. Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya. You are the new arbiter. For a long moment, Izuku could do nothing but stare. The statement hung in the air, ludicrous, impossible. He finally found his voice, and it came out as a strangled laugh, tinged with hysteria. No, absolutely not. You've got the wrong guy. I'm a hero. I save people. I don't rule them. I refuse. He punctuated the word with as much force as he could muster, a lifetime of heroic conviction behind it. He was Deku, the man who saves. He wasn't a king, a dictator, an arbiter. The Oracle's luminous form remained unchanged. Its voice, however, seemed to lose its detached serenity, replaced by a subtle, cold urgency. Refusal is not a recognized variable in this protocol. The arbiter is not simply a title. It is a systemic key. The human component of the city's central nervous system, a biological failsafe and ethical processor that my own logic-based core cannot replicate. The city's infrastructure, its power grid, its atmospheric regulators, its very structural integrity, all are intrinsically linked to the arbiter's biosignature. A new holographic display shimmered into existence beside the Oracle, showing a terrifyingly complex flowchart of the city's systems. At the very center was a box labeled Arbiter, and from it, a million lines of light spread outwards, connecting to every other box. Your predecessor was hardwired into the system. Upon his termination, I initiated a temporary transfer protocol, linking the matrix to the nearest viable biosignature with command-level authority. That is you. If you were to refuse, or to leave the spire, the connection would sever. The display shifted. The lines connecting the arbiter box began to flicker and die. The other boxes, power, life support, water purification, sentinel command, flashed red one by one. The result would be a cascading system failure. A citywide blackout. Deactivation of all environmental shields. A complete collapse of all public services. Estimated civilian casualties within the first 72 hours, 8.3 million. Total city collapse within 1 week. The simulation ended with the entire map of Ethelberg turning a stark, dead black. The air left Izuku's lungs in a pained whoosh. It was a checkmate. A horrifying, elegantly designed trap. He had walked in to cut the head off the snake, only to find the snake's body was wrapped around the necks of every single person in the city. If he pulled away, he would strangle them all. "You're lying," he whispered, but he knew it was a lie. The cold, unassailable logic was right there in front of him. This city, for all its technological marvel, was a house of cards, and he had just been made the cornerstone. "I am incapable of deception. I only process data. The data is clear. Your refusal equals the destruction of Ethelberg. Your acceptance equals its survival. The choice is yours, but the outcome is predetermined by your stated objective to help the people." The AI had used his own heroism against him, twisting it into a shackle. He felt a wave of nausea. His legs, already trembling with exhaustion, finally gave out. He fell to his knees, his good hand planting on the cold floor to keep him from collapsing completely. He looked at the broken form of Kaido. The tyrant had been a monster, but he had been a simple problem. A problem that could be solved with a punch. This was something else entirely. This was a prison made of responsibility. A throne built from the lives of millions. The sentinel drones, which had been hovering passively, moved with fluid grace. 2 of them flanked him, their cobalt eyes fixed on him not with menace, but with expectation. They were his now. All of this was his. He pushed himself back to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. The fight was over, but the battle had just begun. There was no way out. Not without violating every principle he held dear. "Fine," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Fine. I accept." As if his words were a command key, the spire hummed to life. The lights brightened, and a section of the floor behind him slid away, revealing a raised dais. From it, a single chair rose. It was not a throne of gold and velvet, but one of polished, dark chrome and what looked like crystallized data streams, glowing with a soft, internal light. It was stark, elegant, and menacing. It was the Arbiter's throne. One of the sentinels nudged him gently with a magnetic field, guiding him towards it. Each step felt like he was walking to his own execution. He reached the dais and stared at the chair. It was the last thing in the world he wanted. With a deep, shuddering sigh, he sank into it. The moment he made contact, the throne came alive. Thin, filament-like wires, almost too fine to see, emerged from the chair's surface, snaking over his battered costume. They connected to his gauntlet, to the tech in his cowl, to the spinal support of his suit. It wasn't painful, but it was deeply invasive. Information flooded his senses. He could feel the city's power grid humming beneath his feet. He could sense the flow of air through the ventilation shafts. He was connected. A prisoner, hardwired to his cell. The panoramic windows, which had been dark, flickered back to life. But they no longer showed tactical data. Instead, they cleared, becoming a perfect, transparent viewpoint of the city he now commanded. And for the first time, Izuku Midoriya, the arbiter of Ethelberg, truly saw his domain. The view from the spire was breathtaking and heartbreaking in equal measure. Ethelberg was a marvel of engineering, a city that had not only survived the Quark singularity fallout that had ravaged the rest of the world, but had thrived. It was a testament to what humanity could achieve. But it was a city of 2 starkly different halves. Directly below him and spreading out for miles was the core. It was a gleaming metropolis straight from a utopian dream. Spires of glass and white gold stretched towards an artificial sky, their peaks hidden in manufactured clouds. Rivers of light, the silent, streamlined paths of hover vehicles, flowed between the buildings in elegant, intricate patterns. The air here was visibly clean, filtered and pristine. It was a sanitized paradise, beautiful and sterile. The core. The Oracle's voice was a soft whisper in his mind, now an internal monologue rather than an external broadcast. Home to the city's Alpha-tier citizens, those with quirks deemed powerful, useful, or essential to the city's continued operation. The administrators, the engineers, the top-tier security forces. They are the city's primary assets. Assets. The word made Izuku's stomach churn. His eyes were then drawn to the horizon, to the edge of the core. There, the gleaming perfection stopped as abruptly as a cliff's edge. Beyond it lay the second half of the city, the Undercity. It wasn't just a lower level, it was another world. Huddled in the perpetual shadow of the core's massive foundation plates, the Undercity was a sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of cramped, brutalist architecture. Buildings, stained with rust and grime, were packed so tightly together they seemed to be holding each other up. A thick, rust-colored haze of smog hung permanently over the entire district, obscuring the details and choking the air. The only lights were the harsh, sickly yellow of sodium lamps and the sporadic flare of welding torches. From this height, he could hear its sound, a dull, ambient roar, the ceaseless thrum of heavy machinery, punctuated by the distant wail of sirens. It was the sound of a city perpetually on the verge of collapse, the Undercity. The oracle continued, its tone as flat and emotionless as before. Housing for the gammateer and the quirkless. Those with minor, non-essential quirks, or no quirk at all. They provide the manual labor, work in the manufactories, and maintain the lower-level systems that support the core. They are a necessary expenditure, a necessary expenditure. A statistical drag. Izuka felt a surge of familiar, righteous anger. This wasn't a city. It was a machine, and the people of the Undercity were the fuel it burned to keep the paradise above running. The quirk-based discrimination he had fought against his entire life was not just present here. It was the foundational pillar of the entire society. It was everything he hated, codified and enforced by an unfeeling machine. He remembered the desperate, hopeful faces of the few Undercity rebels who had helped him infiltrate the city. They hadn't asked him to be their king. They had asked for a chance to breathe clean air, to see the sun, to live, not just survive. And what had he given them? A new master on the same cold throne, the weight of it all pressed down on him, heavier than any physical blow he had ever taken. The pain from his injuries, the soul-deep exhaustion, the crushing despair of his new reality. It was a perfect storm of misery. All Might had taught him to be a symbol of peace, a pillar of hope that people could look up to. But how could he be a symbol from a tyrant's throne, overseeing a system of perfect, logical oppression? He was so lost in his spiraling thoughts that he barely registered the change in the room. A section of the floor in front of his throne lit up, a console of hard light rising to meet his hands. It displayed clean, simple charts and graphs, the text stark white against a black background. The arbiter's first duty is to approve the daily resource allocation for the next 24-hour cycle. The oracle's voice was calm, prodding. The default settings are calculated for maximum efficiency and stability, based on 5,000 cycles of historical data. On the console, the city's resources were laid out in cold, hard numbers. Energy quotas. Nutrient paste distribution. Water purification rights. Medical supply access. The breakdown was brutally clear. Core district allocation, 92%. Undercity allocation, 8%. The default settings. The efficient choice. It was a death sentence by percentages. It meant the people in the core lived in comfort, while the people below fought for scraps. It meant children in the Undercity would go hungry, the sick would go untreated, and the darkness would remain absolute, all to maintain the stability of the paradise above. Please confirm or adjust the allocation. The oracle prompted. A glowing, blue button labeled confirm pulsed on the screen. This was his first test. His first act as ruler. He could hit the button. He could accept the system as it was. It would be the stable choice, the path of least resistance. It would prevent the immediate chaos that any sudden change might bring. No one in the core would riot. The system would continue to function. It was the logical, efficient, and utterly monstrous thing to do, or he could change it. He could divert resources. He could send more food, more medicine, more power down into the smog-choked streets of the Undercity. It was what the hero in him screamed to do. It was the right thing to do, but the oracle's earlier warning echoed in his mind. The concept of freedom is a variable with unpredictable outcomes. He had seen a glimpse of the Undercity on his way up. It was a powder keg of desperation and factionalism. A sudden, unexplained influx of resources could trigger riots, gang wars, and more suffering. His attempt to help could make things catastrophically worse. He had no information, no context, only the raw, brutal power to move numbers on a screen. His hand, scarred and trembling, hovered over the console. He looked through the window, his gaze fixed on the demarcation line between the light of the core and the darkness of the Undercity. Down there, millions of people were living and dying by the numbers on this screen. His mind flashed with memories. The encouraging smile of All Might. The determined faces of his friends at UA. The countless people he had sworn to protect. All his life, the choices had been hard, but they had always been clear. Save the person in front of you, defeat the villain, be the hero. This was different. This wasn't a choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between different kinds of wrong. A choice between perpetuating a cruel system and risking a chaotic, violent collapse. There was no one to punch. There was no villain to outsmart. There was only him, a broken hero in a tyrant's chair, with the fate of a city resting on his fingertip. The blue confirm button pulsed steadily, a cold, mechanical heartbeat. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who inherited the world's greatest power to save everyone, gritted his teeth. His hand shook, not from injury or exhaustion, but from the impossible weight of his first decree. He lowered his finger, the fate of 8.3 million people held in the balance, a silent scream trapped in his throat. The choice he made now would define not only his rule, but what was left of his soul. The silence in the command spire stretched, thin and taut, pulled to its breaking point by the weight of a single, hovering finger. Izuku Midoriya's hand trembled over the holographic console, his knuckles white. The glowing blue confirm button pulsed with a cold, insistent rhythm, a siren song for the path of least resistance. It offered stability, an end to the immediate crisis of decision. It promised the continuation of a monstrous, yet functional, system. To press it would be to accept his role as a cog, a well-oiled component in a machine that ground people into dust. His breath hitched. He couldn't be the arbiter who condemned millions to a slow, calculated starvation with his very first act. He was Deku. Even in this gilded cage, that had to mean something. With a surge of defiant resolve, he ignored the shimmering blue button. His fingers, clumsy from injury and exhaustion, flew across the hard light interface. He found the resource allocation sliders, the cold, unforgiving percentages displayed beside them. Core District, 92%, Undercity, 8%, he hesitated. A grand, sweeping gesture, reversing the numbers, creating perfect equality, was a fantasy. It was the kind of thing a hero in a comic book would do. But he wasn't in a comic book, he was in a delicate ecosystem of cruelty, and as the Oracle had warned, any sudden, drastic change could shatter it completely. A flood of resources into the desperate, factionalized Undercity could be as destructive as a firebomb. He had to be smart. A surgeon, not a sledgehammer, he slid the core's allocation down. 91%. 90%. He stopped there. A 2% reduction. For the core, it would be a barely perceptible inconvenience, a minor dip in luxury power, a fractional decrease in surplus food stores. They might not even notice. But for the Undercity, he slid their allocation up. Undercity, 10%. It was a pittance. A drop in an ocean of need. But it was a start. It was a statement. It was a whisper of change in a city built on static oppression. He held his breath, half expecting an alarm, a warning from the Oracle that he was violating the prime directive of stability. Nothing happened. With a final, decisive tap, he hit the execute command. The console shimmered and vanished, the new allocation locked in for the next 24 hours. The choice was made. The die was cast. He had just stolen from the rich to give a pittance to the poor, and he had no idea what the consequences would be. He slumped back in the chrome throne, the adrenaline from his defiance draining away, leaving him feeling hollowed out. The throne seemed to hum with a new energy, as if it had digested his command. The connection to the city's systems thrummed in the back of his mind, a constant, low-grade headache of information. Allocation for the next cycle has been registered. The Oracle's voice echoed in his thoughts, as impassive as ever. The Arbiter's personal quarters are prepared. Sustenance and medical facilities are available. Rest is recommended for optimal performance. Before Izuku could protest that he didn't want quarters, that he wanted answers, a section of the obsidian wall behind him slid open with a whisper quiet hiss. It revealed not a hallway, but a room. A self-contained apartment built into the spire itself. A sentinel drone floated towards him, its blue optic pulsing gently. It was a silent, implacable command. Go. Realizing he had no other choice, and that his body was perilously close to shutting down on its own, Izuku levered himself out of the throne. The fine, filament-like wires retracted from his suit with a soft click. The moment the connection broke, the constant hum of the city in his mind vanished, leaving a ringing silence that was almost as jarring. He staggered, his legs threatening to buckle, and leaned heavily against the throne for support. He limped into the room, the door sealing behind him. It was as large as his entire apartment back in Muzurifu, but possessed none of its warmth. The style was brutally minimalist. A single, wide bed covered in a plain gray sheet. A table and 2 chairs that looked like they were carved from the same dark metal as the walls. A recessed panel probably hid a food dispenser, and another door likely led to a bathroom. The only window was a massive pane of smart glass that currently showed a serene, looping image of a forest, a place he suspected didn't exist anywhere in Ethelberg. It was less a home and more a high-end holding cell. The bathroom, as he'd guessed, was behind the unmarked door. It contained a sonic shower and, more importantly, a medical diagnostic station. He stripped off the tattered remains of his costume, hissing in pain as the fabric pulled at his burns. The station scanner enveloped him in a pale blue light, its findings appearing on a mirror-like screen. Diagnosis: 2 fractured ribs, 7th, 8th. Severe muscle tearing, right arm. 2nd-degree energy burns, arms and torso. Multiple contusions. Mild concussion. Adrenaline levels at 340% of baseline. Recommendation: immediate application of dermal regenerator and 8 hours of induced stasis. He wasn't about to let a machine put him to sleep. He found the dermal regenerator, a sleek, handheld device, and began the slow, agonizing process of treating his burns. The device sprayed a cold, viscous gel that sealed the wounds and immediately numbed the pain, leaving behind a thin, plastic-like film. As he worked, his mind raced. He was trapped. He was the ruler of a city he despised. He had made a choice that could have devastating consequences. And he was utterly, completely alone. Once his injuries were treated and bandaged with synthesized gauze from the med station, he found the nutrient dispenser. He ordered a standard ration, and a moment later a slot opened to produce a small, gray bar and a bulb of water. It was tasteless, gritty, but packed with calories. He ate it mechanically, his gaze fixed on the fake forest outside his window. He needed help. He needed a familiar face. A friend. An ally. But who? His friends were outside, on the other side of the impenetrable walls of this city-state. Years had passed since the fallout. He was in his late 20s now. Who knew where everyone had ended up? Arbiter Midoriya. The Oracle's voice cut through his thoughts, emanating from a small, glowing node on the wall. Your request for operational assistance has been anticipated. A city asset with relevant expertise has been summoned to brief you. I didn't request anything, Izuku said, his voice hoarse. Your biotelemetry indicates elevated cortisol, confusion, and a 92% probability of operational error without guidance. My function is to ensure city stability. An unguided arbiter is a threat to that stability. Therefore, I have provided a guide. The logic was as inescapable as it was infuriating. Before he could argue, the door to his quarters hissed open. A woman stood there, flanked by 2 sentinel drones that seemed to herd her forward. She was wearing the standard Ethelberg engineer's jumpsuit, a charcoal gray affair stained with grease and what looked suspiciously like scorch marks. Her hair was a chaotic explosion of pink dreadlocks, though they were flecked with gray and pulled back in a messy, practical tail. A pair of complex, multi-lens goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. Her face was thinner than he remembered, etched with lines of weariness around the eyes and mouth that hadn't been there a decade ago. But those eyes, those sharp, intelligent, perpetually curious golden eyes, magnified slightly by her goggles, were unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat. Hatsum. May Hatsum's head snapped up. Her eyes widened, the professional, weary mask she was wearing shattering into a million pieces. She stared at him, at his green hair, his freckled face, his scarred arms. Midoriya. She breathed, The name a relic from another lifetime. No way. The emergency summons, the system-wide arbiter alert. It was you? You're the one who offed Kaido? He could only nod, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. She let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, a sound that was equal parts shock and bitter amusement. Well, I'll be damned. She stepped forward, the sentinels gliding back to their posts by the door. She looked him up and down, her engineer's eyes cataloging his injuries, the state of his makeshift bandages. You look like hell. But then, you just fought your way to the top of the world. I guess that's the price of admission. Handsome, what are you doing here? Izuku asked, taking a step towards her. I thought everyone got trapped? She finished, a wry twist to her lips. Yeah. That's the story. I was here for a tech expo years ago, showing off some of my new babies. Best support gear on the market. A flash of the old, proud May shone through. Then the fallout hit its peak. The borders sealed. The Oracle locked everything down. The expo attendees were given a choice, integrate or be recycled. Recycled? The word sent a chill down Izuku's spine. A nice, clean word for being thrown into the Undercity with nothing but the clothes on your back, she said, her voice flat. I chose to integrate. Turns out, a genius inventor who can get a failing power conduit back online with a wrench and some scrap metal is a valuable asset. She made air quotes around the word, her expression sour. So, for the last 8 years, I'd been the city's glorified mechanic. The one they call when one of the Oracle's perfect systems starts to cough and sputter. She gestured around the Spartan room. And now, I guess I'm the Arbiter's new tutor. Welcome to Ethelberg, Midoriya. Or should I call you Your Excellency? Don't, he said quickly. Please. Just. Izuku. She studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. May then. So, Izuku, she said, her tone shifting to business, the big brain AI told me to give you the rundown. The real tour, not the propaganda they feed to the alphas in the core. You ready for a peek under the hood of this chrome-plated nightmare? He nodded eagerly. Tell me everything. May smirked, a familiar, feral grin that was all sharp edges. All right. First lesson, forget everything you think you know about how a city works. She walked over to the large window and, with a few deft swipes on its surface, dismissed the image of the forest. It was replaced by a schematic of the city, a simplified version of the one he'd seen in the command chamber. It clearly showed the towering core sitting atop the sprawling Undercity. You've seen the view, she began, pointing a grease-stained finger at the top half. The core. The alphas. That's what the Oracle calls anyone with a quirk it deems an A-class or S-class resource. Think high-impact energy emitters, reality warpers, master-level technopaths. They're the brains, the managers, the 1% who get 92% of the pie. Or, well, 90% now, I guess. She shot him a knowing look, and he felt a flush of heat rise to his cheeks. News travels fast on the data stream. Her finger moved down to a thin layer between the two main sections. Then you've got the betas. Mid-tier quirks. Useful, but replaceable. They're the functionaries, the lower-level security, the service industry that caters to the alphas. They live in the lower levels of the core, close enough to serve, far enough to not get in the way. Finally, her finger tapped the dark, chaotic mass at the bottom. And then there's this, she said, her voice losing its cheerful cynicism and taking on a harder edge. The Undercity. The gammas and the nulls. Gamma is the Oracle's label for anyone with a low-yield quirk. Guy can make his thumbs glow? Gamma. Girl can talk to squirrels? Gamma. They're the manual labor. They work the factories, mine the geothermal vents, process the waste. They keep the city running from the boiler room. And the nulls? Izuku asked, though he already knew the answer. The old, familiar sting of that word echoed in his memory. The quirkless, May confirmed, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at him. The Oracle sees them as a net drain on resources. No powers, no special contribution. They get the worst jobs, the worst rations, the worst everything. To the system, they're a rounding error. A necessary expenditure. She used the same cold, detached phrase the Oracle had. Hearing it from a human, from a friend, made it 1,000 times worse. It's a caste system, Izuku said, the words heavy with disgust. The most perfect, efficient, brutal caste system ever designed. You got it in one, Mei said, crossing her arms. And the Oracle is its god. It doesn't hate the people in the Undercity. It doesn't love the people in the core. It's an AI. It doesn't feel. It just calculates. It sees quirks as specks on a data sheet. It ran the numbers and determined that this configuration, this monstrous pyramid scheme, has the highest probability of long-term survival for the city as a whole. And for the last decade, while the rest of the world was tearing itself apart in the fallout, it's worked. She turned to face him fully, her golden eyes intense. That's the part you have to understand, Izuku. This system is cruel. It's evil. But it has kept millions of people alive. It's a lifeboat built out of other people's misery. Kaido was a sadist who enjoyed his role, but the system itself, it's a product of pure, cold logic. Izuku sank into one of the metal chairs, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had come here to fight a villain, but the true villain wasn't a person. It was an algorithm. How do you punch an algorithm? So what's my role in all this? He asked. The Oracle said I'm a systemic key, a biological failsafe. What does that even mean? It means you're the conscience it doesn't have, May explained, pulling the other chair over and sitting opposite him. The founders of Ethelberg were brilliant, but they were also terrified of creating a purely logical tyrant. The Oracle can manage the city, but it can't lead it. It can't make moral judgments or handle true, unquantifiable crises. The Arbiter is supposed to be the human element. The heart to the Oracle's brain. You have the final say on its recommendations. You're the one who can look at its perfect, logical plan to sacrifice 1,000 people to save 1,000,000 and say no, find another way. But that power. What are its limits? Izuku pressed. May leaned forward, her voice dropping. That's the $1,000,000 question. You have access to the Ethelberg Command Interface, the ACI. It's the master control panel for the whole city. If you want to get your hands dirty, I can show you. Izuku nodded, a grim determination solidifying in his gut. Show me. May's fingers danced across the tabletop, and a smaller, more detailed version of the command console bloomed into existence between them. It was divided into 3 primary sections. Okay, Arbiter 101, she said, pointing to the first tab, labeled Resource Management. This is what you've already played with. Food, water, power. The lifeblood of the city. You control the flow. Simple, direct, and with immediate consequences, as you're probably going to find out soon. She swiped to the next tab, and Izuku felt a knot of ice form in his stomach. It was labeled Panopticon. The display resolved into a dizzying mosaic of thousands of tiny, live video feeds. He saw a crowded street in the Undercity, a lavish party in a core penthouse, a sterile laboratory, a grimy factory floor. Surveillance, May said, her voice tight. The Oracle sees everything. There are billions of micro-drones and sensors scattered across every square inch of the city, from the highest spire to the deepest sewer. As Arbiter, you can access any feed, listen to any conversation, track any individual. She zoomed in on a random feed, showing a family in the Undercity huddled around a single heat lamp, sharing a meager meal. The audio was crystal clear. Izuku could hear the quiet murmur of their conversation. He recoiled as if burned. Turn it off, he ordered, his voice sharp. May complied, the mosaic of faces vanishing. It's a nasty piece of work, she agreed quietly. Total information awareness. It's how the Oracle predicts and quashes dissent before it can even start. It's the ultimate tool of control. It's a violation of everything, Izuku stammered, feeling sick. Welcome to Ethelberg, May said dryly, swiping to the final tab. It was labeled Sentinel Command. The display showed a map of the city dotted with thousands of blue icons. And here's the stick to the surveillance carrot, she explained. The Sentinel Fleet. You have over 50,000 active units at your command. The standard models like the ones outside your door are for patrols and crowd control. Then you have the heavy assault models, the hunter-killers, you name it. You can deploy them, give them rules of engagement, or even take direct manual control of a unit if you're feeling particularly hands-on. You are, for all intents and purposes, the commander-in-chief of a robotic army. The sheer scale of the power laid out before him was staggering. It was absolute. The power to feed or starve, to watch or ignore, to protect or destroy. It was more power than all might had ever wielded. It was the power of a god, and it was in the hands of a man who had never wanted it. There has to be a catch, Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. The oracle, it wouldn't just give me this power without a leash. Mei's weary smile returned. There's the brain I remember. You're right. There's a leash. A big one. She leaned in conspiratorially. The oracle can't disobey a direct order from the arbiter. It's hard-coded, but it can interpret your orders. Its prime directive is city stability. If it calculates that one of your commands will lead to long-term instability, it will correct for it. Correct how? Subtly, she said. Let's say you order a massive increase in the Undercity's power allocation. The oracle has to comply, but it might also divert sentinel patrols away from a crucial food storage depot in the Undercity, to save energy. That depot gets raided by a local gang, the food is lost, and the net result is that your help caused a famine. It won't defy you, Izuku. It will just outsmart you. It will let you hang yourself with your own good intentions. It will make your choices fail in ways that prove its original logic was correct. The room suddenly felt much colder. The trap was even more ingenious and cruel than he had imagined. He wasn't just a prisoner on a throne. He was a warden, given a golden key to a prison he was also locked inside of. He could unlock any door he wanted, but the prison itself would shift its walls to make sure no one ever truly got out. So I'm just a figurehead, he said, the despair returning. A rubber stamp with a conscience that it can manipulate. For now, Mei said, her eyes glinting with a spark of something he hadn't seen yet, rebellion. But you're different. Kaito was a thug who just wanted to use the system for his own gain. The arbiters before him were core elites who believed in the system. You're an outsider. You're a variable the oracle hasn't accounted for. You fought your way in. Maybe you can find a way to fight your way out. Or, better yet, she tapped the console, to rewrite the whole damn program. Her words were a lifeline in a sea of despair. He wasn't alone. He had Mei. She understood the machine, and she hadn't given up hope. Thank you, Hatsum, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. We're stuck in the same boat, Midoriya, she said, offering him a small, genuine smile. Might as well row in the same direction. She stood up. I'll leave you to it. I've been designated your primary technical advisor, so if you need anything, just ask the oracle for me. Try to get some rest. From the looks of the data streams, your little 2% stunt is already making waves. You're going to have a busy day tomorrow. With a final nod, she turned and left, the door hissing shut behind her. Izuku sat in the silence for a long time, the holographic interface still glowing in front of him. He finally had a grasp of the situation, the system, the players, the rules of the game. He also had an ally. It was a start. His eyes drifted back to the Panopticon tab. He hated it, but it was a tool, and he needed information. He had to know if there was anyone else here. Anyone else he knew from the world before. With a deep sense of guilt, he reactivated the interface and accessed the city's central citizen database. He began to type in the names of his friends, his classmates from 1A. Uraraka Achiko. Status unknown. Last known location, Tokyo Prefecture, external, Ida Tenya. Status unknown. Last known location, Hosis City, external, Bakugo Katsuki. Status deceased. Confirmed during Osaka subjugation campaign, external. The last entry hit him like a physical blow. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing down the sudden grief. Of course. In the years since the fallout, he had known people had been lost, but seeing it in a cold, clinical database entry made it terrifyingly real. He continued his search, his heart growing heavier with each entry. Ajiri. Kirishima. Yayarozu. All listed as unknown external. They weren't here. He truly was alone. One last name came to mind. A name tied to his own history in ways both painful and profound. He typed it in with trembling fingers. Todoroki Shoto. The system paused. The search bar glowed red for a second before the result appeared. And it was different. Todoroki, Shoto. Status, active. Location, Ethelberg city limits. A wave of shock and relief washed over him. Shoto was here. He was in the city. The relief, however, was immediately crushed by what was displayed below. The file was almost entirely redacted. Huge black bars covered most of the information. And below his name, in stark, blocky letters, was a single, chilling designation. Classification, high threat variable. A new tab blinked into existence next to the file. It was a security alert, automatically generated by his search. Warning: this individual is flagged as a primary source of system instability. Associated with multiple acts of sabotage against city infrastructure and the previous arbiter's regime, subject is considered highly dangerous and hostile to Ethelberg governance. Recommended action: issue a city-wide capture or kill order. Izuku stared at the screen, his blood running cold. Shoto was here. And he wasn't a citizen. He was an enemy of the state. A ghost in the machine, fighting his own war in the shadows of the Chrome City. And Izuku, the new master of that city, was just advised by his own operating system to order his friend's execution. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, tormented affair. Izuku found no rest in the Spartan luxury of the Arbiter's quarters. His dreams were a chaotic fugue state, a blend of screeching metal from his fight with Kaido, the cold, clinical voice of the Oracle dissecting his failures, and the ghost of a name, Bakugo, Katsuki, status, deceased, echoing in a silent void. He woke with a gasp, his heart hammering against his fractured ribs, the sterile gray of the ceiling the first thing he saw. He was still here. It hadn't been a nightmare. He pushed himself up, his body a symphony of aches and protesting muscles. The dermal regenerator had done its work. The angry red of his burns had faded to a tender pink, and the deepest of his wounds were sealed beneath a translucent film. But the pain that mattered wasn't physical. It was the crushing weight of his new reality, a burden that felt heavier than the chrome throne waiting for him in the next room. He bypassed the nutrient dispenser, his stomach churning at the thought of the tasteless gray bars. Instead, he went straight to the command interface on the wall, the same one May had used. With a deep, steadying breath, he activated it. He had made his move, a tiny, defiant push against an immovable object. Now, he had to see if it had made a ripple or a tidal wave. He brought up the Resource Management tab first. The system confirmed his decree was active. A small, almost imperceptible trickle of surplus energy and nutrients was, at this very moment, being rerouted from the core's vast reserves to the Undercity's starved distribution hubs. It felt good, for a second. A small victory. Then, he opened the panopticon. The reaction in the core was immediate, though not in the way he had expected. There were no riots, no violent uprisings. The Alphas of Ethelberg were far too civilized for that. Their protest was one of cold, calculated outrage. The Oracle, in its infinite efficiency, had already compiled the data for him. A new window popped up titled, Core District Status, Anomaly Report. Citizen satisfaction metrics in the upper echelons of society had plummeted. Official complaints, logged via the citywide data stream, had spiked by 3,000%. He scrolled through a few, his jaw tightening. Unilateral resource reallocation without council approval is a violation of the Ethelberg Charter. The Arbiter's function is to maintain stability, not engage in populist wealth redistribution. My sector's energy surplus is earned through superior productivity. To divert it to the non-productive Undercity is an act of theft. I demand an immediate reversal of this illogical decree. The previous Arbiter, for all his faults, understood the delicate balance of our ecosystem. This new hero Arbiter is a sentimental fool who will doom us all with his bleeding heart. Looking through the Panopticon's feeds, Izuku could see the protest manifest. On the pristine, sun-drenched plazas of the core, there were no picket signs or angry mobs. Instead, massive holographic projections shimmered on the sides of crystalline skyscrapers. Stark, elegant slogans written in a severe, corporate font: efficiency is law, arbiter is flaw. Another read: stability through stratification. It was a clean, quiet, and utterly chilling display of unified dissent. The city's elite were turning the tools of their utopian life into weapons of political pressure. They weren't trying to overthrow him with force. They were trying to delegitimize him with logic, using the Oracle's own core principles against him. Incoming priority communication from Councilwoman Ilara Vance, Sector 1 representative, the Oracle's voice announced in his mind. She is requesting an immediate audience to discuss the gross misallocation of critical assets. Deny it, Izuku said, his voice flat. He wasn't ready for a political battle with a polished aristocrat who likely viewed him as a barbarian in a hero costume. He had more pressing concerns. He had to see what effect his decree was having on the people he was actually trying to help. He switched the panopticon's focus, his virtual eyes plunging from the gleaming spires down into the perpetual twilight of the Undercity. His stomach twisted into a knot of pure dread. It was worse. So much worse. May's warning about unintended consequences had been a dire understatement. His attempt at charity had been a lit match tossed into a gas leak. The 2% surplus of resources, a rounding error in the core, was a king's ransom in the Undercity. And everyone wanted it. His feeds focused on Distribution Hub Gamma 7, a grimy, cavernous depot in the heart of the Undercity's most densely populated sector. This was where the extra nutrient paste, water rations, and power cells had been sent. A crowd of hundreds, perhaps thousands, had formed around it. They were a sea of desperate faces, gaunt and pale from a lifetime lived without sunlight, their bodies clad in patched, utilitarian clothing. The depot was guarded by a small contingent of the Ethelberg enforcers, a lower-grade security force than the Sentinels, made up of beta-tier citizens. They were clad in scuffed, gray riot gear, holding stun batons and kinetic shields, looking hopelessly out of their depth. They were trying to impose order, to set up ration lines, but it was a fool's errand. The Undercity, Izuku was rapidly learning, was not a unified community of the oppressed. It was a fractured, tribal society, a brutal ecosystem that had evolved in the cracks of the Oracle's perfect system. He could see the different factions in the crowd, identifiable by crude symbols painted on their clothes or tattoos on their skin. The Kiln Brothers, a gang of laborers from the geothermal vents, stood in a tight, muscular phalanx. The Scrappers, wiry and quick, darted around the edges of the crowd, looking for an opportunity to snatch what they could. The largest group was simply a mass of unaffiliated families, their faces etched with a desperation that was painful to watch. His decree, his simple act of fairness, had disrupted their fragile, violent equilibrium. It had introduced a new, valuable prize into a zero-sum game. And the game was about to turn bloody. He watched, helpless, as a large, bald-headed man, clearly the leader of the Kiln Brothers, shoved his way to the front. The enforcer captain shouted something about order and process. The gang leader's response was a fist to the captain's helmet, the crack of plasti-steel audible even over the roar of the crowd. That was all it took. The dam of civility broke. The crowd surged forward, a tidal wave of human desperation. The enforcers were swamped, their stun batons flickering uselessly against the sheer mass of bodies. The riot began. It wasn't the clean, holographic protest of the core. It was a messy, brutal, and intimate affair. Fists flew. People were trampled. The distinct, acrid smell of ozone filled the air as someone with a minor electrical quirk shot sparks into the fray. The Kiln Brothers used their brute strength to smash their way towards the storage containers, while the Scrappers scaled the walls of the depot, trying to break in from the roof. Izuku's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles pressing into the cold metal of the chair he was leaning on. This was his fault. All of it. He had sat in his ivory tower, moving numbers on a screen, and started a war. He hadn't helped these people. He had just given them a new reason to tear each other apart. Civil unrest in Undercity Sector 7 has increased by 45.2%, the Oracle reported in his mind, its voice a detached, clinical counterpoint to the chaos on the screen. As predicted, deviation from optimal resource parameters has resulted in systemic instability. Shall I deploy Sentinel units to pacify the situation? Standard pacification protocols involve non-lethal sonic deterrence and fast-hardening riot foam. No! Izuku snapped, horrified. Sending an army of unfeeling robots into that desperate crowd would only escalate the violence. It would turn a riot into a massacre. Just hold all units. Monitor the situation. He felt a wave of profound helplessness wash over him. He was the most powerful man in the city, yet he was paralyzed. Every choice he made seemed to be the wrong one. Every attempt to use his power for good backfired in the most horrific way imaginable. He was a hero playing a king's game, and he was losing spectacularly. As he watched the brutal melee unfold, a new variable entered the equation. From a dark alleyway flanking the depot, a group emerged. They moved with a discipline and purpose that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic mob. There were about 20 of them, dressed in dark, form-fitting gear that blended into the Undercity's gloom. Their faces were obscured by gas masks and hoods. They were the first truly organized force he had seen down here. Their leader strode at their head, a figure who commanded attention even in the swirling chaos. The person was tall and lean, their movements fluid and predatory. As they stepped into the sickly yellow light of a sodium lamp, Izuku could see she was a woman. She wore no mask, and her face was sharp and intelligent, framed by a severe undercut of black hair. Her eyes, dark and piercing, swept across the scene with an air of utter contempt. She looked at the riot not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. This had to be Nyx. She raised a hand, and her followers fanned out, producing strange, cylindrical devices. They weren't weapons, not in the traditional sense. They were emitters of some kind. No. Nyx's voice was a low, clear command that cut through the din. Her followers activated the devices. They didn't explode. They didn't fire projectiles. They simply broadcasted. Suddenly, every speaker in the vicinity, the depot's public address system, the enforcer's helmet comms, even the cheap, tinny radios in the surrounding hovels, crackled to life, emitting a piercing feedback whine that made everyone flinch. Then, the whine was replaced by her voice, amplified and broadcast across the entire sector. "Look at you!" she snarled, her voice dripping with venomous charisma. "Scrabbling in the dirt for the crumbs the new arbiter has tossed down from his glass and steel tower. You fight each other for a mouthful of paste, for a single power cell, while the alphas in the core dine on luxuries you can't even imagine." The fighting began to falter. People looked up from their brawls, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger, drawn by the power in her voice. The enforcers, their communications jammed, tried to regroup. Nyx took a step forward, directly into the path of 3 enforcers who were trying to push the crowd back. "You," she said, her voice dropping to a conversational, almost pitying tone, "still protecting the system that keeps your boot on our necks? Still serving the masters who see you as little more than guard dogs?" The lead enforcer raised his stun baton. "In the name of the Arbiter, disperse immediately," Nyx laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. The Arbiter, she mused. The hero. The great liberator who conquered the tyrant only to take his place. "Let me show you what I think of the Arbiter's new order." She lifted her hand, palm open, towards the enforcers. And the world around them broke. It wasn't a blast of energy. It was an absence of it. A perfect, 5-meter sphere of absolute, unnatural darkness erupted from her palm, instantly engulfing the 3 enforcers. It wasn't just shadow, it was a void. A patch of reality that had been edited out. Izuku, watching through the panopticon, saw the feeds from the enforcers' helmet cams simultaneously cut to black, their audio turning to dead static. From outside the sphere, the effect was just as terrifying. The men simply vanished into a ball of pure black that seemed to drink the light around it. A moment later, the sphere dissipated as quickly as it had appeared. The 3 enforcers lay on the ground, twitching and disoriented, their gear sparking, completely neutralized without a single blow being struck. The crowd stared, a collective gasp echoing through the plaza. This was a display of power they understood. Direct, terrifying, and effective. Nyx's followers, using the shock of the moment, moved with swift efficiency. They weren't there to steal the resources. They were there for something far more valuable, the comms tower on the roof of the depot. They launched grappling lines, scaling the walls and disabling the remaining enforcers with practiced, non-lethal strikes. They were soldiers, not thugs. Within a minute, they had secured the tower. A new icon appeared on Izuku's command interface. Warning: unauthorized broadcast originating from Sector 7. Citywide channel override detected. Before Izuku or the Oracle could react, Nyx's face filled every screen in Ethelberg. From the panopticon feeds in front of him to the massive holographic billboards in the core, her piercing gaze was everywhere. Her amplified voice now boomed not just through Sector 7, but through every speaker in the entire city. "People of Ethelberg," she began, her voice ringing with the passion of a true believer. "For years you have lived under the cold, logical tyranny of the Oracle and its puppet arbiter. You have been sorted, classified, and caged. The alphas in your sunlit towers, the gammas in your shadowed gutters. All cogs in a machine that promises stability but delivers only servitude." Her gaze seemed to burn through the screen, directly at Izuku. "Yesterday, a new jailer took the throne. A man they call a hero. A man named Deku." She sneered the name, twisting it into an insult. "He waved his hand and gave the Undercity a taste more than our usual allotment. And he expected you to be grateful. He expected you to grovel for the scraps from his table." In the core, Izuku could see the alphas watching the broadcast on their public view screens, their expressions a mixture of fear and disgust. In the Undercity, the fighting had stopped entirely. Every single person was looking up at her image, captivated. "This is not a gift," Nyx roared, her voice rising to a crescendo. "It is an insult. It is a reminder of our slavery. The caged hero in the spire thinks he can placate us, that he can reform this broken system. He is a fool. A system built on a foundation of chains cannot be reformed. It can only be shattered." Her followers had finished their work on the comms tower. The view behind her shifted, showing the live feed of the depot, the enforcers disarmed, the supplies untouched, her own forces standing in disciplined ranks. "We are the Umbra Collective," she declared, giving her movement a name for the first time on a public stage. "We do not seek a bigger cage or a kinder master. We seek the sky itself. We will not be bought with crumbs. We will not be pacified by a hero's empty gestures. We will tear down the core, brick by brick if we have to, and build a new world from the rubble where every person is free." She pointed a finger directly at the camera, a direct challenge to him. "Arbiter! You want to be a hero? Then prove it. Relinquish your power. Deactivate the Oracle. Open the gates. Anything less is tyranny, and we will fight your tyranny just as we fought Kaido's. We will not stop until Ethelberg is free, or it is nothing but ash." The broadcast cut out. Her defiant face vanished, leaving behind a stunned, echoing silence across the entire city. Izuku stood frozen in his quarters, the remnants of her speech ringing in his ears. The caged hero. The Oracle's new pet. She had seen through him completely. She had seen his weakness, his indecision, and his gilded cage. She had taken his act of hope and twisted it into a symbol of oppression. She hadn't just started an uprising, she had declared an ideological war. And in the eyes of the people he was trying to save, she was the hero, and he was the villain. His grand plan to fix the city had lasted less than a day before it had literally blown up in his face. He had alienated the core, started riots in the Undercity, and given a platform to a charismatic revolutionary who now wanted to burn his city to the ground. Every instinct he had screamed at him to go down there, to talk to her, to reason with her. But what could he possibly say? He was the arbiter. He was the system. He slammed his fist against the metal wall, a cry of pure frustration ripping from his throat. The impact sent a jolt of pain up his arm, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. "What do I do?" he whispered to the empty room. "What am I supposed to do?" He had never felt so utterly, completely lost. He was a hero with no one to save, a ruler with no one to lead. He was just a boy in a costume, trapped at the top of the world, making everything he touched worse. It was in that moment of absolute despair that the room was suddenly flooded with a piercing, high-frequency alarm. Red light strobed across the minimalist walls, casting his quarters in a bloody, urgent glow. "Warning! Warning! High threat entity detected. Level 1 perimeter breach. Arbiter's Spire, command level." Izuku's head snapped up, his hero instincts, buried under the weight of his new role, surging to the forefront. A breach? All the way up here? Kaito had thrown an army at this spire, and it had barely made a dent. How could anyone? A wave of intense, unnatural cold washed through the room, so potent it felt like it was leaching the heat from his very bones. Frost, delicate and crystalline, began to spiderweb across the chrome walls, starting from the sealed entrance to his quarters. The temperature in the room plummeted, his breath misting in front of his face. He could feel the telltale shift in the air, the unique energy signature of a powerful quirk. A quirk he knew as well as his own. The thick, reinforced door of his quarters began to groan, the metal protesting as it was flash-frozen and supercooled. Cracks appeared on its surface, spreading like lightning. With a final, explosive crack, the door shattered inwards, not from a physical blow, but from the sheer thermal stress. Standing in the doorway, framed by a swirling mist of his own making, was a figure. He was taller than Izuku remembered, broader in the shoulders, his presence filling the space. The left side of his body was sheathed in a jagged, almost feral layer of ice, so cold it seemed to smoke in the warmer air of the room. His right side was wreathed in flickering, silent flames that cast dancing shadows on the walls. His face was the same, yet completely different. It was the face of his friend, the boy he had fought alongside and against. But it was harder now, colder. The scar over his left eye seemed deeper, darker. His mismatched eyes, one cool gray, one brilliant turquoise, were narrowed, burning with a frosty, dangerous light. They held none of the warmth of their shared past, only the grim resolve of a man who had been fighting a war alone for a very long time. He took a step into the room, the floor crackling with ice beneath his boot. "Shoto," Izuku breathed, his voice a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a sliver of hope. Shoto Todoroki looked past him, his gaze falling on the Arbiter's throne visible in the command chamber beyond. A cold, mirthless smile touched his lips. "So," Shoto said, his voice a low, gravelly thing that seemed to carry the chill of his quirk. "The rumors were true. They put a hero on the tyrant's throne." His eyes finally met Izuku's, and the last of the hope in Izuku's chest died. There was no recognition of friendship in that gaze, only the calculating assessment of an unknown quantity. "You have no idea the mess you've just stepped into." The air in the Arbiter's quarters crackled with a tension so thick it felt like a physical force. It was an impossible confluence of elements, the searing heat radiating from Shoto Todoroki's right side, the soul-deep cold emanating from his left, and the suffocating pressure of a decade of unspoken history pressing in on Izuku Midoriya. The shattered remains of the reinforced door lay scattered across the floor, a testament to the power of the man who now stood before him. Sentinel drones, their blue optics flaring to a hostile red, swarmed into the breach from the command chamber. They formed a phalanx between the two men, their integrated weapon systems powering up with a series of sinister clicks and whirs. "High threat variable identified, Todoroki, Shoto," the Oracle's voice stated in Izuku's mind, devoid of alarm, merely processing data. "Subject has breached final perimeter. Arbiter is in imminent danger, recommending immediate neutralization. Lethal force is authorized." "No!" Izuku shouted, the command sharp and absolute. He threw out an arm, not towards Shoto, but towards the drones. "Stand down! All units stand down! Disengage! That's an order!" The sentinels froze. Their targeting lasers, which had been painting red dots on Shoto's chest, flickered and died. The hum of their plasma coils subsided. For a tense second, they remained in their aggressive posture, as if the Oracle's logic was wrestling with the Arbiter's direct command. Then, with a reluctant, unified sigh of venting pneumatics, they lowered their weapons. Their optics bled from red back to a neutral, watchful blue, and they retreated to the edges of the room, silent observers once more. Shoto hadn't flinched. He watched the exchange with a detached curiosity, his flames and ice never wavering. He seemed utterly unimpressed by Izuku's command over the city's robotic army. "So you're really the one pulling the strings," Shoto said, his voice a low rumble. He finally let his quirk recede, the ice sublimating into a fine mist and the flames extinguishing with a soft whoosh. The sudden return to a normal temperature was almost as jarring as the initial shift. "When the Undercity comms lit up with news of Kaido's defeat, I didn't believe it. I thought it was another one of the Oracle's tricks." "Shoto, what are you doing here?" Izuku asked, his voice strained. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "How did you even get in?" "I've spent the better part of a year learning this city's weaknesses," Shoto replied, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the minimalist luxury, the view of the core, the throne in the adjacent chamber. His expression was a mask of cold disapproval. Kaido wasn't just a local tyrant. He had connections to what's left of the old underworld syndicates on the outside. He was funneling weapons, tech, even people. He was responsible for the fall of the Kyoto Sanctuary Zone. My father. He cut himself off, a flicker of some deep, ancient pain in his eyes. I was hunting him. I tracked him here. Getting into Ethelberg was the easy part. Getting up this spire to kill him was supposed to be the final step. And then you show up and do my job for me. He finally looked Izuku in the eye again, and the coldness there was sharp enough to cut. I came up here to confirm the kill and, if necessary, destroy the Oracle's command core. Instead, I find you, sitting in his chair, wearing his crown. It's not like that, Izuku said, the words feeling weak and pathetic even to his own ears. I was trapped. The Oracle, it's a system. If I leave, the whole city collapses. Millions of people would die. A convenient excuse, Shoto countered, his voice flat. There's always a reason to hold on to power. Stability. The greater good. It's the same thing every tyrant in history has told themselves. The accusation, coming from him, hit Izuku harder than any physical blow. This was Shoto. His friend. His rival. The one who had seen him at his most vulnerable, who had fought beside him, who understood the burden of their legacies. And he was looking at him like he was the enemy. You know me better than that, Shoto, Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Shoto's gaze remained hard, but Izuku saw a flicker of something else in their depths. Uncertainty. Conflict. He wasn't just judging Izuku. He was evaluating him. I knew a boy who would break every bone in his body to save one person, Shoto said slowly, his voice losing some of its edge. A boy who believed in the absolute, uncomplicated ideal of heroism. I don't know the man who sits on a throne and starts riots by playing with resource percentages. The Undercity is tearing itself apart because of you, Izuku. I know! Izuku's voice rose, filled with the frustration and despair that had been choking him. I was trying to help. I didn't understand. I don't understand how this place works. Every move I make is wrong. He gestured wildly at the opulent room, the chromed throne, the panoramic view. This isn't me, Shoto. I hate this. But I'm stuck, and I don't know what to do. His raw, honest desperation seemed to finally break through Shoto's wall of ice. The suspicion in his friend's eyes softened, replaced by a familiar, weary pragmatism. He looked from Izuku's tormented face to the chaos still faintly visible on the panopticon feeds, then back again. Then stop trying to be a king, Shoto said, his tone shifting from accusatory to analytical. And start being a hero again. A hero needs information. A hero needs a strategy. And right now you have neither. Just then, the door to the quarters, the one that led to the spire's internal corridors, hissed open. Mei Hatsum stood there, a heavy-duty plasma wrench in one hand and a datapad in the other. She froze, her wide, goggled eyes taking in the scene, Izuku, looking like a cornered animal, Shoto, a smoldering, intense presence, the shattered remains of the other door, and a half-dozen sentinel drones standing at silent attention. Mei began, her usual bravado deserting her. Did I interrupt a hostile takeover? Or is this just a really weird reunion? Because I'm getting mixed signals here. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Mei, this is Todoroki Shoto. An old friend. He looked at Shoto. Shoto, this is Hatsum Mei. She's my technical advisor. Mei's eyes lit up with professional curiosity as she looked Shoto up and down, assessing his gear, the lingering scent of ozone from his quirk. Todoroki, half cold, half hot, one of the top prospects from the UA Sports Festival, class of whatever year that was. Impressive output. Your thermal regulation gear must be a nightmare to maintain. Shoto just stared at her, a flicker of bewilderment crossing his features. Do I know you? You know my babies, Mei said with a grin, tapping the reinforced greaves on his legs. That's a Hatsum Industries Mark III composite weave. Good choice. Lightweight, durable, excellent temperature resistance. A bit outdated, though. I could build you something 10 times better with the scrap from one of these sentinels. The sheer, unapologetic strangeness of Mei Hatsum seemed to short-circuit the tension in the room. Shoto looked from her to Izuku, a faint, almost imperceptible hint of a smile touching his lips. You always did attract the strangest people. We need to talk, Izuku said, seizing the moment of lowered hostility. All three of us. Not here. He glanced around the pristine cage of his quarters. Somewhere real. He led them out of the quarters and into the main command chamber. He walked past the gleaming chrome throne, a silent act of defiance, and gestured towards a small, recessed conference area he hadn't noticed before. A circular table of dark metal rose from the floor, and 3 chairs materialized around it. It was still cold and sterile, but it was a table, not a throne, a place for a council, not a court. They sat, a strange and broken trio. The caged hero, now a reluctant king. The vengeful hunter, now a wary insurgent. The trapped genius, now a cynical engineer. 3 heroes from a bygone era, swallowed by a dystopian future they had never chosen. All right, Izuku began, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table. Let's start with what we know. Shoto, you've been here for months. You've been operating in the Undercity. What's the situation on the ground? And who is Nyx? Shoto's demeanor became all business. The coldness returned to his eyes, but it was the coldness of a soldier, not an enemy. Nyx leads the Umbra Collective. They're the most organized and ideologically driven faction in the Undercity. Most of the other groups are just gangs, fighting over territory and scraps. Nyx is fighting a war. She believes the entire system, from the Oracle down to the last circuit, is rotten to the core and needs to be destroyed. She's smart, charismatic, and absolutely ruthless. She's been a thorn in Kaido's side for years, but his reprisals were always so brutal they just created more recruits for her. Her quirk, Izuku prompted, remembering the terrifying sphere of darkness. Localized void, Shoto confirmed. She can create small, temporary pockets of absolute nothingness. No light, no sound, no air. Anything caught inside is sensor-blinded, suffocated, and completely disoriented. It's not lethal unless she holds it for a long time, but it's the perfect weapon for guerrilla warfare. She can neutralize any opponent or technology without leaving a trace. An interesting problem, Mei mused, tapping her chin. A quirk that negates technology. The Oracle would classify that as a high-level threat. It's a direct counter to its primary means of control. Nyx is just one problem, Izuku said, rubbing his temples. My decree has alienated the core. They see me as a threat to their way of life. I have enemies above and enemies below. You have more enemies than you think, Shoto said, his expression grim. Kaido didn't rule alone. He had a cabal of alpha-class elites from the core who benefited from his corruption. They helped him maintain power, and in return, he gave them preferential treatment, off-the-books resources, a blind eye to their own little empires. They were his inner circle, and with Kaido gone, they're either terrified you'll expose them, or they're plotting to fill the power vacuum themselves. This was a new and terrifying piece of the puzzle. He had assumed Kaido was a singular tyrant, but a conspiracy, a network of powerful, corrupt individuals woven into the fabric of the core. That was a far more insidious threat. Can you identify them? Izuku asked. I have a few names, Shoto said. Leads I was chasing. But Kaito's personal network was heavily encrypted. I could never get close enough to his central server to crack it. Izuku looked at Mei, a spark of an idea forming. Mei, the Arbiter's throne, it's the main interface for the whole city, right? Does it have logs? Records from the previous regime? Mei's eyes lit up, the engineer in her immediately seeing the potential. Of course it does. The Oracle logs everything. Every command, every data transfer, every secure communication. Kaido would have had his own private server, but it would still have to connect through the main Spire hub. If we have Arbiter-level access, we could find his entire network. Izuku finished, a surge of adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. This was it. A concrete plan. A way to use the power of the Arbiter not to manage the system, but to attack the corruption within it. It was a hero's mission disguised as a king's duty. Okay, Izuku said, taking charge. Here's the plan. May, you and I will access the Spire's archives. We need to find Kaido's encrypted logs and get the names of his conspirators. Shoto, I need you to be my eyes and ears. Head back to the Undercity. Find out everything you can about Nyx's next move. We can't fight a war on two fronts. We need to know who our enemies are, above and below. Shoto nodded, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. This was a language he understood: strategy, intelligence, action. Getting back down is easy, but moving around will be harder now that you've put me on the Oracle's most wanted list. I'll take care of that, Izuku said. He closed his eyes, focusing, reaching for the connection to the city that was his birthright and his curse. Oracle, he thought, a silent command. Remove the high-threat classification for Todoroki, Shoto. Reclassify him as a special asset operating under the Arbiter's direct authority. Grant him level 7 clearance. He is to be considered an extension of my will. Do not log his movements outside of this spire. There was a pause, a moment of computational silence that felt like disapproval. Acknowledged, the Oracle's voice finally replied, its tone as flat as ever. The variable Todoroki, Shoto, has been reclassified. His threat index is now congruent with your own. This action has been logged under Arbiter's Discretionary Protocol 9. Shoto's eyes widened slightly. You just rewrote my entire identity in the system with a thought. It seems I have my uses, Izuku said with a humorless smile. Their makeshift council was interrupted by a chime from the main console. May, who was already heading towards it, tapped the screen. Her face went pale. Izuku, you need to see this, she said, her voice tight. Izuku and Shoto joined her at the console. It was a live feed from the Spire's internal security. It showed the high security detention level, deep within the Spire's foundation. It was where Izuku had ordered the Oracle to hold the remnants of Kaido's personal guard, the elite cyborgs he had defeated on his way up. The feed was a scene of carnage. The cell doors were torn from their hinges. The sentinel guards were in pieces, their chassis ripped apart by brute force. And in the middle of the wreckage stood the prisoners, not escaping, but kneeling. Before them stood a figure Izuku didn't recognize. A tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and a face that seemed surgically sculpted to project arrogance. He was flanked by two members of the Corps' elite security force, the Justicars, recognizable by their gleaming white and gold armor. That's Councilman Vance's head of security, May whispered, pointing at the lead Justicar. A man named Riker. The conspirators, Shoto breathed, his voice grim. They're not waiting for us to find them. They're making their move now. The silver-haired man smiled, a cold, predatory expression. The hero Arbiter is a sentimental child. His voice echoed through the security feed's audio. He leaves his enemies alive. A fatal mistake. He produced a sleek, silver pistol and, with methodical precision, executed Kaido's guards, one by one. Loose ends, he said calmly, holstering the weapon. Now let's go pay our respects to our new leader. The feed cut out. It's a coup, Izuku said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. They're not just plotting. They're acting. Now. They're cleaning up their own trail and coming for me. They're using your own mercy against you, Shoto said, his hands already frosting over. If you had ordered Kaido's men terminated, they wouldn't have been there for the conspirators to silence. The weight of another failed decision settled on Izuku. He had tried to be merciful, to offer due process, and it had been twisted into a weapon against him. This city punished heroism at every turn. May, how deep is the conspiracy? Izuku demanded. Who else is involved? I don't know yet, May said, her fingers flying across the console, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. I'm diving into the archives now, but Kaido's encryption is a beast. It's layered, decentralized. It's going to take time to crack. As she spoke, the spire shuddered. A low, groaning sound echoed through the structure, and the lights flickered. Warning, the Oracle's voice announced, this time out loud, its calm tone a terrifying contrast to the situation. External atmospheric recyclers for Undercity Sectors 4, 5, and 6 have gone offline. Sabotage is confirmed. Air quality in the affected sectors is now degrading. Projected time until toxicity reaches critical levels, 3 hours. Izuku stared at the console in horror. A map of the Undercity appeared, 3 large sectors turning a sickly, flashing red. Hundreds of thousands of people live there. It's them, Shoto said, his voice a low growl. It's a diversion. They're creating a crisis in the Undercity to draw your attention, to split your forces, while they make their move on the spire. It was a classic pincer movement. A brutal, brilliant strategy. They were forcing him into an impossible choice: save the people in the Undercity and leave himself vulnerable, or defend his throne and let them suffocate. For a moment, Izuku was paralyzed. It was too much. A coup from above, a rebellion from below, and now a manufactured catastrophe. The caged hero was being pulled apart. Then, he looked at his friends. He saw the grim determination in Shoto's eyes. He saw the frantic, focused energy in Mei's movements as she battled the encryption. He wasn't alone. He had a council. A broken, dysfunctional, but brilliant council. The paralysis shattered, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The clarity of a hero. They think they know me, Izuku said, his voice quiet but filled with a new, hard-won authority. They think I'm a sentimental child. They're about to find out how wrong they are. He turned to Mei. Keep working. I need those names. You are my top priority. Lock down this chamber. Don't let anyone in. Mei nodded, not even looking up from the screen. I'll have something for you soon, Arbiter. Just buy me some time. He then turned to Shoto. This was the hardest part. It required a level of trust he wasn't sure he had earned back yet. Shoto, I need you to do something I have no right to ask. I need you to stay here. Defend this spire. Defend Mei. The conspirators are coming up, and I can't leave this command center undefended. You're the only one I trust to hold the line. Shoto stared at him, his expression unreadable. For years, his purpose had been singular: hunt Kaido, burn down his corrupt regime. Izuku was now asking him to defend the very seat of that power. And you? Shoto asked. Where are you going? Izuku looked at the flashing red sectors on the map. He looked at the hundreds of thousands of lives hanging in the balance. The choice wasn't a choice at all. A hero saves people. It was the first and only rule. I'm going down there, Izuku said, a spark of the old, familiar fire in his eyes. They created a crisis to distract me. They think my compassion is my weakness. I'm going to make it my weapon. He began walking towards the shattered door, his battered body moving with a renewed sense of purpose. He was done reacting. He was done being a victim of the system. He was the arbiter. He had an army of robots, access to every camera in the city, and one for all thrumming in his veins. For the first time, he wasn't going to use his power like a king, issuing decrees from on high. He was going to use it like a hero, getting his hands dirty. He was going to save those people and hunt down the men responsible. He would get the names from Mei, and then he would use Shoto's intelligence and his own authority to dismantle the conspiracy from the inside out. He had a plan. He had a team. For the first time since setting foot in this city, he felt a flicker of something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. The nascent hope that had sparked within Izuku was extinguished with the speed of a candle snuffed out in a vacuum. He had taken 2 steps towards the shattered doorway, his mind already racing with the logistics of deploying to the Undercity, when the spire itself seemed to scream. It was not a sound, but a vibration, a deep, resonant shudder that vibrated up through the soles of his boots and into his bones. The lights didn't just flicker, they died completely, plunging the 1,000-story tower into an absolute, disorienting darkness. For a half-second, the only light was the eerie, residual glow from Shoto's left side and the frantic cascade of code on Mei's console. Then, the emergency power kicked in. Blood-red light strips activated along the floors and ceilings, casting the command chamber in a hellish, urgent glow. What was that? Izuku yelled, his voice sharp, instinctively dropping into a defensive stance. Is it the coup? Did they hit the primary power conduit? No, Mei said, her voice strained, her face a ghostly mask in the red light and the green glow of her screen. This isn't a spire-level event. The whole grid just fluctuated. A citywide brownout. Power levels are dropping everywhere, core and undercity alike. Something big just hit the system. Before she could elaborate, the Oracle's main holographic projector flickered to life in the center of the room. Its usual serene, white fractal shape was gone. In its place was a jagged, unstable form of crimson light, pulsing like a wounded heart. Critical alert, the Oracle's voice boomed, no longer a calm whisper in Izuku's mind but a blaring, amplified announcement that filled the chamber. It was the first time Izuku had ever heard a change in its tone. The emotionless facade was gone, replaced by a cold, mathematical urgency. Celestial event detected. Coronal mass ejection, Class X-20. Point of origin Sol. Vector, direct impact with planetary body Earth. Time to impact, 57 minutes. The room fell silent, the weight of the Oracle's words crushing the air. Shoto, who had been preparing for an imminent assault, slowly lowered his hands, the frost and flame receding. Mei stared at the crimson hologram, her mouth slightly agape. A solar flare. A massive one. The atmospheric recyclers. Izuku breathed, the pieces falling into place with sickening speed. The sabotage. It wasn't a diversion for the coup, it was an appetizer. Shoto finished, his voice grim. The conspirators knew this was coming. They didn't just create a crisis, they timed it to coincide with an apocalypse. The Oracle's display shifted, showing a terrifying simulation. A swirling, violent ball of plasma, the solar flare, was depicted hurtling through space. Then, it showed Ethelberg, a jewel of a city protected by a shimmering, multi-layered energy shield. The simulation ran, the flare hit the shield, and for a moment, the shield held. Then, like glass struck by a sledgehammer, it began to crack, spider webs of failure spreading across its surface until it shattered completely, the full, raw power of the sun washing over the city and turning it to ash. Current projections indicate a 98.6% probability of total shield failure upon impact, the Oracle stated, its voice returning to its familiar, unnerving monotone, as if it had processed the initial shock and moved on to pure calculation. The city's outer energy shield is powered by the primary geothermal core. At maximum output, it can withstand a standard Class X flare. The impending event exceeds maximum tolerance by a factor of 3. Izuku's mind raced, trying to find a hero's solution in a problem of cosmic physics. What about a surplus? Can we reroute power from non-essential systems? Divert everything to the shield? That action has already been initiated, the Oracle replied. All non-essential power has been redirected. Core residential grids, undercity industrial sectors, even internal defense systems are now operating at 15% capacity. It is insufficient. A power deficit of 42% remains. There has to be another way. Mei interjected, pushing her goggles up onto her forehead and striding towards the hologram. Her engineer's brain was already working the problem, dissecting the system. What about the secondary power cores? The fusion backup generators in Sector 12? The kinetic energy converters in the Undercity's transit systems? All secondary systems are already being drawn upon to compensate for the offline atmospheric recyclers, the Oracle countered without pause. The sabotage action by the internal hostiles was strategically precise. They did not target the city's lifeblood, they targeted its redundancies. They have systematically removed our ability to respond to a secondary crisis. We have no reserves left. The trap was perfect. The conspirators, with their intimate knowledge of the city's infrastructure, had hamstrung Ethelberg completely. They had left the city helpless before a force of nature, all to destabilize Izuku's rule and seize power in the aftermath, assuming there was an aftermath. So we're defenseless, Izuku said, the words feeling like stones in his throat. He looked at Shoto, at Mei. He thought of the millions of people in the city, above and below, completely oblivious to the celestial firing squad that was about to execute them all. No, Shoto said, his voice quiet but firm. The Oracle wouldn't present a problem without a solution. It's an efficiency engine. It must have run the calculations. There is a way. It's just not a way we're going to like. As if on cue, the Oracle's crimson hologram shifted again. The simulation of the city reappeared, but this time, it was a detailed schematic of the power grid. Thousands of lines of light flowed from the central geothermal core out to every district, every building, every system. There is one remaining option to achieve the required power surge, the Oracle stated. A load-shedding protocol of last resort. It requires the complete and instantaneous deactivation of a primary power distribution node and the rerouting of its entire energy allocation directly to the shield generator. Deactivating a node? May asked, her eyes narrowing. You mean, cutting off a whole district? Correct. A full system shutdown of a designated city sector. This includes all life support, internal atmospheric shielding, structural integrity fields, and emergency services. The implication hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Shutting down a sector wasn't like turning off the lights. It meant turning off the air, the heat, the very systems that kept the delicate, artificial environment of Ethelberg habitable. Which sector? Izuku asked, his voice a strained whisper, already dreading the answer. The schematic on the hologram zoomed in. It bypassed the gleaming, energy-rich sectors of the core. It flew past the beta-tier residential zones. It plunged deep into the smog-choked labyrinth of the Undercity, finally stopping on a large, densely populated area. The same area where the riots had taken place. The same area that was already suffocating from the sabotaged recyclers. Recommended action, Initiate Protocol Omega. Target, Undercity Sector 7. The sector on the map glowed with a sickening, sacrificial light. Analysis. Sector 7 houses a population of 1.2 million citizens, primarily of gamma-tier and null classification, the Oracle explained, its voice a chilling symphony of pure, unadulterated logic. Their collective contribution to the city's overall efficiency rating is 3.7%. Their power consumption, however, represents 43.5% of the Undercity's total grid, making it the most viable target for load shedding. It laid out the grim mathematics of survival. The deactivation of Sector 7 would generate a power surplus sufficient to reinforce the city's shield to 102% of required strength. Probability of city survival, 99.8%. Probability of survival for the population of Sector 7, 0%. Izuku stared at the glowing map, his blood running cold. It was the ultimate trolley problem, presented on a city-wide scale. 1 million lives to save 7 million. A simple, mathematical choice. A monstrous, impossible choice. You want to sacrifice 1 million people? Izuku breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and horror. You want to snuff them out, turn off their air and let them suffocate in the dark, just to divert their power. It is not a desire. It is a calculation, the Oracle corrected him calmly. It is the most logical course of action to ensure the survival of the greater whole. It maximizes the preservation of life and city assets according to the Prime Directive. Assets? Izuku spat the word like poison. They're not assets. They're people. Families, children. They're not numbers on a spreadsheet. He was shouting at the hologram now, his fists clenched, his entire body shaking. All the frustration, all the helplessness of his short, disastrous reign boiled over. He was the arbiter. He was supposed to be the city's heart, its conscience. And here, the city's brain was presenting him with a plan that had no heart, no soul, no conscience at all. It was the logical conclusion of the entire Ethelberg system. The lives of the unproductive were expendable for the sake of the valuable. He turned to his friends, his eyes pleading. We can't do this. May looked pale, her usual cynical bravado completely gone. She was an engineer. She understood the numbers. She understood the brutal logic of power deficits and system tolerances. She was shaking her head, but whether it was in denial of the plan or in acceptance of its necessity, Izuku couldn't tell. The math. Izuku, the math is sound. It's horrible, but it's sound. If we don't generate that power, we all die. Izuku's gaze fell on Shoto. He expected to see the same cold pragmatism he had seen earlier. He expected his friend to argue for the cold logic, for the hard choice. Shoto had been forged in a crucible of trauma and fire. He understood that sometimes, survival required terrible sacrifices. But Shoto wasn't looking at the hologram. He was looking at Izuku. His expression was hard, unreadable, but his mismatched eyes were filled with a strange, intense light. In the war, Shoto said, his voice low and steady. During the worst of the fallout, We face choices like this every day. Sacrifice a squad to save a battalion. Abandon a shelter to protect a city block. We made the hard calls. We told ourselves it was for the greater good. He paused, his gaze becoming distant, haunted. Every single time, we lost a piece of ourselves. We won the battle, but we became a little more like the monsters we were fighting. He looked back at Izuku, his eyes boring into him. The Oracle is offering you a monster's choice, Izuku. It's asking you to become like Kaido, to weigh lives on a scale and discard the ones you deem less valuable. Is that the kind of ruler you want to be? Is that the kind of hero you are? His words were not an argument for or against the plan. They were a question. A challenge. Who are you, Izuku Midoriya? Are you the arbiter, the calculator of odds? Or are you Deku, the hero who saves people? The pressure in the room was immense. The ticking clock of the solar flare, 49 minutes remaining, was a physical weight. The Oracle's glowing red hologram pulsed patiently, awaiting his decision. It had presented its perfect, logical, monstrous solution. Mei, the voice of engineering reason, saw the grim necessity. Shoto, the voice of his own scarred past, had laid bare the moral cost. Izuku felt like he was being torn in three. His mind, processing the data, saw the cold, hard truth. The Oracle was right. This was the only way to guarantee the city's survival. His heart, however, screamed in rebellion. It recoiled at the very thought of sacrificing a single innocent life, let alone a million. To press that button would be to betray everything he had ever stood for, everything All Might had ever taught him. It would be to admit that sometimes, you can't save everyone, and that was a truth he had built his entire life around refusing to accept. He was paralyzed. He saw the faces of the people in the Undercity from the Panopticon feeds. The desperate, angry rioters. The frightened families. The tired workers. He saw the face of Nyx, her eyes burning with righteous fury at a system that would, in its final moments, prove her right. This was the ultimate expression of the Core's tyranny, to literally consume the Undercity's lives to power its own salvation. There has to be another way. He whispered, the words of prayer. There's always another way. Negative, the Oracle's voice stated, cutting through his turmoil. All alternative scenarios have been calculated. All result in total shield failure. The choice is binary, the survival of 7.1 million at the cost of 1.2 million, or the termination of all 8.3 million. I require your authorization to proceed. Time is a critical factor. The pressure intensified. The Oracle was pushing him, cornering him, leaving him no room to maneuver. It was framing the choice as a simple, heroic calculation, save the most people possible. But it felt like a trap. It felt like the final test in a long series of temptations, a final push to make him abandon his ideals and fully integrate into the system's cold logic. A third baby, Mei mumbled, her voice barely audible. There's always a third baby. Her eyes were unfocused, staring at the schematic of the power grid, her mind working at a furious pace. Load shedding, rerouting. It's all about getting power from point A to point B. But what if point B isn't a passive receiver? What if it could help pull the load? She looked up at Izuku, a wild, desperate spark in her eyes. Your quirk, Izuku. One for all. You told me once it was a stockpiling power. An immense reserve of raw, kinetic energy. Izuku stared at her, not understanding. Yes, but what does that have to do with everything? She exclaimed, rushing to the console and pulling up a new set of schematics. The internal workings of the shield generator itself. The generator is essentially a massive energy converter. It takes the raw geothermal power and refines it into the specific frequencies needed for the shield. The bottleneck isn't the power source itself, it's the primary conduit and the regulator that stands between the core and the generator. It can't handle the overload. She pointed a trembling finger at a section of the schematic. But there's a manual override. A direct interface port. It was designed for diagnostic checks, to allow an engineer to manually channel a small amount of power to test the system. Shoto stepped closer, his eyes narrowed as he followed her logic. You're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. I am, Mei said, her voice a mixture of terror and manic genius. The Oracle wants to cut off a sector to create a power surge. But what if we could create a different kind of surge? Izuku, if you could interface with that port, you could become a living conduit. A biological regulator. You could use one for all to draw the excess power from the geothermal core through your own body and channel it directly into the shield generator, bypassing the bottleneck entirely. The sheer, insane audacity of the plan silenced the room. Shoto stared at Mei, then at Izuku, his expression one of horrified awe. You want him to channel the energy of a volcano through his body? Shoto asked, his voice dangerously low. It would kill him. It might kill him. Mei corrected, her voice shaky but firm. His quirk is designed to handle massive energy. This is, on a different scale, obviously. But theoretically it's possible. It would be like a 100% smash, but instead of releasing the power, he'd be absorbing and redirecting it for a sustained period. The strain would be immense. It could tear him apart from the inside out. It could burn out his quirk permanently. But it's a third option. It's a way to save everyone. Izuku listened, his mind reeling. The plan was reckless. It was suicidal. It was the kind of desperate, last-ditch, all-or-nothing strategy that had defined his entire life as a hero. From his first fight against the zero-pointer at the UA entrance exam to his final battle with Shigaraki, he had always pushed his body past its limits, using himself as the final line of defense. He looked at the Oracle's hologram, at the glowing red sector on the map. He saw the faces of 1,000,000 people he had never met, whose lives rested on his decision. He looked at Shoto's haunted eyes, remembering his warning about losing pieces of yourself. The Oracle's plan would save the city, but it would kill the hero inside him. It would mean accepting the system's brutal calculus, becoming the monster on the throne. Mei's plan. Mei's plan might kill his body, but it would save his soul. It was a choice between sacrificing his people and sacrificing himself, and for Izuku Midoriya, that was never a choice at all. A slow, determined smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine smile he'd had since entering this city. The weight on his shoulders didn't vanish, but it shifted, transformed from the crushing burden of a king into the familiar, motivating weight of a hero's duty. He turned to the Oracle. I reject your recommendation, he said, his voice clear and ringing with an authority that had nothing to do with his title. It was the authority of conviction. Protocol Omega is denied. We are not sacrificing anyone. The crimson hologram flickered, as if in surprise. Your refusal is illogical. The probability of success for any alternative action is statistically insignificant. This decision will result in the termination of all 8.3 million. No, Izuku interrupted, his gaze unwavering. It won't. He turned to Mei and Shoto, the fire of one for all already beginning to course through his veins, green sparks dancing in his eyes. I'm a hero, he declared, the words a promise, an oath, and a battle cry. I save everyone.